In the quiet, mountainous region of Gyeongsang, during the Joseon dynasty of the 17th century, lived a young scholar named Doyon. Orphaned at a young age, he resided with his uncle, a man known for his miserliness rather than his kindness. Doyon, a diligent student with a keen mind, yearned for more than the meager existence offered in his small village. He dreamt of traveling to Hansong, the capital, to take the civil service examinations and escape his wretched circumstances. One day, his uncle, tired of feeding an extra mouth, cruelly expelled him from his home, giving Doyon the final push he needed to embark on his journey. Doyon set off with nothing but the worn clothes on his back and the burning desire for a better future. The journey to Hansong was arduous, and the young scholar, accustomed more to books than to the harsh realities of the road, soon found himself exhausted and lost. As dusk settled, he stumbled upon the outskirts of a grand estate. The imposing walls, crafted from granite, hinted at the wealth and status of its owner. He would later learn it was the residence of a retired official, Kwang Kong, District Duke Li Gai. Desperate for shelter and a bite to eat, Doyon approached the imposing gate. The gatekeeper, after a moment of scrutiny, allowed him to enter, guiding him to a small, detached building typically used for receiving less important guests. Although weary, Doyon couldn't help but admire the grandeur of the estate, the meticulously arranged gardens, and the numerous buildings that spoke of opulence and power. He was informed that Kwang Kong Li Gai had recently suffered a great tragedy. His only son had succumbed to a virulent epidemic, leaving behind a young, grieving widow, Li Sioa. That night, after a simple but much appreciated meal, sleep eluded Doyon. The vastness of the estate, the weight of its sorrow, and the uncertainty of his own future weighed heavily on his mind. He wandered through the seemingly endless corridors, each turn revealing more splendor than the last. Lost and in search of a privy, he stumbled upon a chamber with a door slightly ajar. A soft, melancholic light spilled from within. He peered inside. The room was bathed in the silvery glow of the moon, illuminating the figure of a woman asleep on a low bed. It was Li Sioa, the widowed daughter-in-law of Kwang Kong Li Gai. Her beauty was breathtaking, even in repose. The thin silk of her hanbok clung to her form, revealing the delicate curve of her shoulder and the tantalizing hint of her full breasts. Doyon, starved not only for food but also for beauty and affection, found himself captivated. He was trapped by her sorrow, her beauty, and the vulnerability showing through her clothes. He felt pulled into a web of desire. "She is a vision," he whispered. Unknowingly, his heart beated faster, echoing through the room. He knew it was wrong, that he should retreat, but he couldn't tear his gaze away. He was no thief, there to steal possessions, but a young man entranced by a beauty he had never before encountered. Thoughts, both innocent and forbidden, swirled in his mind, fueled by his own loneliness and the intoxicating sight before him. The societal chasm between them, he, a penniless scholar, and she, a noblewoman, seemed to fade in the moonlight, replaced by a raw, human connection. The silence of the night was broken only by Sioa's soft sighs and the occasional rustle of the silk fabric as she shifted in her sleep. Each movement, each glimpse of her skin, sent a fresh wave of desire through Doyon. He imagined reaching out, touching her hair, tracing the curve of her cheek. He imagined the warmth of her skin, the scent of her hair, the taste of her lips. He knew he was playing with fire, that the consequences of being discovered could be dire, but the pull was too strong to resist. The injustice that was always a part of his life made him unable to resist temptation. Unbeknownst to Doyon, his presence had not gone entirely unnoticed. Li Jin, a younger cousin of Kwang Kong Li Gai, also resided within the estate. A minor official himself, Li Jin harbored a deep-seated jealousy towards anyone who might gain favor with the Kwang Kong. He saw Doyon's arrival as a potential threat, a possible obstacle to his own ambitions. He had been observing the young scholar, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and resentment. Li Jin had seen Doyon enter Sioa's chamber. A cruel smile played on his lips as he envisioned the chaos he could unleash. This was his opportunity to eliminate a potential rival and solidify his own position within the household. Instead of intervening, he stealthily made his way to the Kwang Kong's quarters, his mind already formulating the accusations he would level against the unsuspecting scholar. Meanwhile, Doyon remained frozen, caught between desire and the fear of discovery. The sight of Sioa, so beautiful and vulnerable, was a torment. He was acutely aware of the vast social gulf that separated them, of the strict Confucian laws that governed their society. To even think of touching her, a noble woman and a widow in mourning, was a transgression punishable by severe penalties, even death. He took a tentative step back, his conscience finally gaining the upper hand over his base desires. But it was too late. The floor creaked under his weight, a small sound that seemed to echo like thunder in the stillness of the night. Sioa stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked at him with confusion, her gaze still clouded by sleep. Then, realization dawned, followed by a flicker of fear. Before either of them could speak, a harsh voice shattered the silence. What is the meaning of this? It was Li Jin, standing at the doorway, his face contorted with feigned outrage. Behind him stood Quankong Li Ge, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. I found this scoundrel sneaking into Sioa's room. He clearly intended to violate her, to dishonor our household, Li Jin declared, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. Doyon was stunned into silence. He opened his mouth to protest, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. He knew how this looked, how easily his actions could be misconstrued. He was an outsider, a nobody, and Sioa was a member of the respected Li clan. His word against hers, and against Li Jin's, would be worthless. He was trapped. Sioa, now fully awake, pulled the silken fabric of her hanbok closer, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She looked from Doyon to her father-in-law, and then to Li Jin, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. She had been lost in a dream, a bittersweet memory of her late husband, when the creak of the floorboard and the subsequent intrusion had jolted her awake. She hadn't invited Doyon in, but she also couldn't deny that he had been in her room. Quankong Li Ge stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Doyon. His face, normally etched with weariness, was now hardened with anger. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you enter this room with ill intentions?" The weight of the accusation, the potential dishonor to his family, and the betrayal of the hospitality he had offered, pressed down on him. He had offered kindness and received this. Doyon, facing the wrath of the Quankong and the malicious glee of Li Jin, knew that his fate hung precariously in the balance. He could lie, attempt to shift the blame, perhaps even accuse Sioa of enticing him. But the thought of such a cowardly act, of further dishonoring a woman already burdened by grief, was repulsive to him. He straightened his shoulders, meeting the Quankong's gaze directly. "I confess," he said, his voice trembling slightly but firm. "I entered the room. I was lost, seeking a privy, and stumbled upon it by accident. But I swear, on my ancestors' honor, that I intended no harm to Sioa Buen, foreign, a respectful term for a married woman. I was captivated by her beauty, I admit, but I never touched her, nor did I have any intention of violating her." He knew his words sounded weak, even to his own ears. The circumstances were damning, but he couldn't bring himself to lie, to betray the small spark of decency that still flickered within him, even in this desperate situation. He closed his eyes, awaiting the inevitable punishment. He expected the guards to be summoned, to be dragged away, imprisoned, perhaps even executed. Li Jin sneered. "A likely story. You expect us to believe that you, a mere beggar, stumbled into the room of a noble woman and simply stood there, admiring her beauty? You are a liar and a scoundrel. You deserve the harshest punishment." Sioa, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Abianov, father-in-law," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I do not know why this man entered my room. I was asleep, but I do not believe he intended to harm me. He looked at me with sadness, not with lust. It was a small defense, a hesitant offering of doubt, but it was enough to give the Quankong pause. Quankong Li Ge studied Doyon's face, searching for any sign of deceit. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw a flicker of honesty, a hint of the same sorrow that he himself carried. He had always been a shrewd judge of character, a skill honed over years of service in the royal court. And something in Doyon's demeanor, in his willingness to admit his transgression without attempting to excuse it, resonated with him. He turned to Li Jin, his eyes narrowed. "You seem very eager to condemn this young man," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Perhaps too eager?" Li Jin paled slightly, realizing that he might have overplayed his hand. I only wish to see justice done, Abianim, he stammered, to protect the honor of our family. Justice will be done, the Kwankong said firmly, but it will be true justice, not the hasty judgment of a jealous man. He turned back to Doyon. You have admitted your fault, he said, and I believe you are not entirely without honor. Therefore, I will not hand you over to the authorities. Doyon's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected condemnation, not mercy. The Kwankong continued, his voice now softer, tinged with a hint of weariness. But neither can I simply dismiss this incident. You have entered the private chambers of a woman of my household, a widow under my protection. This cannot be overlooked. He paused, considering his options. He looked at Seowa, her face pale and drawn, still bearing the marks of her recent grief. He looked at Doyon, young and seemingly lost, with a flicker of potential that reminded him of his own deceased son. An idea, unconventional and perhaps even shocking, began to form in his mind. There is a way to resolve this honorably, he said, his gaze sweeping between Doyon and Seowa. A way to restore balance and to provide for the future. He took a deep breath. Doyon, you will become my adopted son, and you will marry Seowa. The silence that followed was absolute. Doyon stared at the Kwankong, dumbfounded. He had expected punishment, imprisonment, even death. But marriage? To a noblewoman? It was beyond his wildest imaginings. Seowa gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. She had been prepared for a life of lonely widowhood, bound by the strict Confucian code that dictated she remain faithful to her deceased husband's memory. The thought of remarriage, especially to a commoner, was almost unthinkable. But there was also a flicker of something else in her eyes, a faint spark of hope. The prospect of escaping her enforced solitude, of having a companion, a protector, perhaps even a lover, was not entirely unwelcome. Li Jin was livid. His carefully constructed plan had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly. He opened his mouth to protest, but the Kwankong silenced him with a sharp gesture. This is my decision, he declared, his voice brooking no argument. It is the best solution for all concerned. It will restore honor to Seowa, provide Doyon with a place in society, and give me an heir to carry on my family name. He looked at Doyon. Do you accept? Doyon, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, could only nod, speechless. He had gone from a penniless wanderer on the brink of ruin to the adopted son of a nobleman and the husband-to-be of a beautiful woman, all in the space of a few hours. The Kwankong then turned to Seowa. And you, my daughter? He asked, his voice gentle. Do you accept this arrangement? Seowa hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering between Doyon and her father-in-law. She was still bound by tradition, by the expectations of her society, but she also saw a chance for a new life, a life that might offer her some measure of happiness. She bowed her head. I will obey your wishes, Abionim, she said softly. And so it was decided. The unlikely union, born out of a near disaster and a nobleman's unconventional wisdom, was to take place. The wedding was a quiet affair, attended only by close family members and a few trusted retainers. Li Jin, seething with resentment, was conspicuously absent, having been sent away on a fabricated errand by the Kwankong. Doyon, still somewhat dazed by the rapid turn of events, found himself standing before a small altar, dressed in the unfamiliar finery of a nobleman. Seowa, beside him, looked radiant in a traditional wedding hanbok, her beauty enhanced by a delicate blush that colored her cheeks. Despite the unusual circumstances, a sense of solemnity pervaded the ceremony. The traditional vows were exchanged, binding Doyon and Seowa together in a union that neither of them had foreseen. As Doyon looked into Seowa's eyes, he saw a mixture of apprehension and hope, a reflection of his own uncertain emotions. He vowed, silently, to be a good husband to her, to honor and protect her, to repay the extraordinary kindness of the Kwankong. That night, in the bridal chamber, a nervous anticipation filled the air. The room was richly decorated with silk hangings and intricate carvings, a stark contrast to the humble dwellings Doyon had known. Seowa sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze downcast. Doyon, feeling awkward and out of place, approached her slowly. Seowa Boin, he began, his voice hesitant. I know this is unconventional. I know I am not the husband you expected. Siewa looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "You are not?" she agreed softly. "But you are also the man who spared me from further shame, who spoke the truth when a lie might have saved you." Doyon sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I will do my best to be a good husband to you," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "I will honor you, and I will strive to make you happy." A faint smile touched Siewa's lips. "I believe you will," she said. She reached out, her hand hesitantly touching his. It was a small gesture, but it sent a jolt of warmth through Doyon. The night that followed was a delicate dance of discovery, a slow unraveling of fears and inhibitions. Doyon, though inexperienced, approached Siewa with tenderness and respect. He was mindful of her grief, of the loss she had suffered. He spoke to her softly, sharing his own story, his own hopes and dreams. Siewa, in turn, gradually opened up to him. She spoke of her late husband, of the brief happiness they had shared, and of the loneliness that had consumed her since his death. She also revealed a hidden strength, a resilience that had allowed her to survive the suffocating constraints of her life. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, their initial awkwardness gave way to a growing intimacy. The touch of hands led to a tentative embrace, and then to a kiss, hesitant at first, then deeper, more passionate. The silk of their clothes rustled as they fell away, revealing the vulnerable beauty of their bodies. The lovemaking that followed was not a fiery explosion of lust, but a slow, gentle exploration, a merging of two souls seeking solace and connection. It was a testament to the unexpected bond that had formed between them, a bond forged in adversity and strengthened by mutual respect and a shared desire for a better future. The description of the scene was tasteful, with more focus on the emotional connection of the two than the graphic detail of the act. It was the beginning of a true and lasting love. In the days and weeks that followed, Doyon embraced his new life with diligence and gratitude. He studied diligently under the tutelage of the Kwankong, learning the intricacies of court etiquette, Confucian philosophy, and the art of governance. He proved to be a quick learner, his sharp mind absorbing knowledge like a sponge. He also devoted himself to Siewa, treating her with unwavering kindness and respect. He spent hours with her in the gardens, discussing poetry, history, and the affairs of the day. He listened patiently to her stories, offering comfort and companionship. He made her laugh, something she had not done in a long time. Siewa, in turn, blossomed under Doyon's care. The sadness that had clouded her eyes began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed spark of life. She found herself drawn to his intelligence, his gentle nature, and his unwavering devotion. She discovered a passion within herself that she had thought long dead, a capacity for love and happiness that she had believed lost forever. Their relationship, born out of unusual circumstances, deepened into a genuine and abiding love. They found solace in each other's company, strength in each other's support, and joy in each other's presence. The Beatfu estate, once filled with sorrow, began to echo with laughter and the sounds of life. Meanwhile, Li Jin, banished to a remote posting, continued to nurse his resentment. He plotted his revenge, biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back at Doyon and reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. He sent spies to the Beatfu, hoping to gather information that he could use to discredit Doyon and undermine his position. Doyon, aware of Li Jin's animosity, remained vigilant. He knew that his newfound happiness was fragile, that it could be shattered by the machinations of his envious cousin. He focused on his studies, determined to prove himself worthy of the Kwankong's trust and to secure his place in society. Years passed. Doyon, guided by the Kwankong's wisdom and fueled by his own ambition, excelled in his studies. He passed the civil service examinations with top honors, earning a prestigious appointment in the royal court. He quickly rose through the ranks, gaining a reputation for his intelligence, integrity, and unwavering commitment to justice. He used his position to help the common people, to fight corruption, and to promote fairness and equality. Siewa, by his side, proved to be a valuable advisor and confidant. Her knowledge of courtly etiquette and her keen understanding of human nature were invaluable assets. She also bore him several children, securing the continuation of the Li lineage, much to the Kwankong's delight. The estate was truly alive with a full next generation. Li Jin's attempts to sabotage Doyon's career proved futile. His plots were exposed, his lies revealed, and his influence waned. He eventually met a miserable end, disgraced and alone, a victim of his own bitterness and envy. Doyon, through hard work, dedication, and the unwavering support of his wife and adoptive father, had achieved the seemingly impossible. He had risen from a penniless orphan to a respected official, a loving husband, and a devoted father. He had transformed his life, and in doing so, had brought happiness and prosperity to those around him. The tale, in origin one of tragedy and potentially ruined virtue, now brought honor and prestige. Kwarteng Li Gai, in his twilight years, witnessed the flourishing of his family with immense satisfaction. He had taken a gamble, a leap of faith based on his intuition and a young man's honest confession. And that gamble had paid off handsomely. He saw in Doyon not only a worthy successor, but also a reflection of his own values: integrity, compassion, and a commitment to justice. He often reflected on the night that had changed everything, the night Doyon had stumbled into Siowa's room. What had seemed like a potential disaster had, in fact, been a blessing in disguise. Siowa, once a grieving widow resigned to a life of solitude, found herself living a life filled with love, laughter, and purpose. She had not only found a devoted husband in Doyon, but also a true partner, someone who valued her intelligence and her spirit. She actively participated in Doyon's work, offering advice and support. And she took great pride in raising their children, instilling in them the same values that she and Doyon cherished. As for Doyon, he never forgot the humble beginnings from which he had come. He remained grounded, despite his elevated status, always remembering the kindness and generosity that had been shown to him. He used his position and influence to help those less fortunate, to advocate for the poor and the oppressed, to make the society he lived in a little bit fairer, a little bit more just. He often thought back to that fateful night, to the moment he had stood before Siowa, captivated by her beauty, torn between desire and honor. He realized that it was not just luck that had saved him, but also his own inherent decency, his willingness to confess his transgression, even when it could have cost him his life. It was a lesson he carried with him always, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, integrity and courage could light the way. The story of Doyon and Siowa became a legend, whispered among the common folk and recounted in the halls of power. It was a tale of redemption, of second chances, of the transformative power of love and kindness. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, to the ability to overcome adversity and to build a better future, even from the most unlikely of beginnings. And it all began with a chance encounter, a moment of weakness, and a nobleman's unconventional decision, proving that even the most seemingly disastrous events could, with a little bit of faith and a lot of heart, lead to a truly happy ending. The tale served to explain the rise of the Dalsong area, near Daegu, and gave a legend's weight to those who arose to become leaders in that area.